Today in the mail, I received a mailer, a political mailer. You know, they come around this time of year, people telling you what to vote for, but it's a statement put out by the America First Legal Foundation. And I think you can guess what political party these people are affiliated with. I guess just based on the fact that they use quotes from Fox News. But the mailer says, it's very important, very important. Joe Biden and his progressive allies in Washington want men to use the girls' bathroom in grades K through 12, and they are exposing your child to radical sexual and gender extremism in the classroom. And the picture is of, I guess, an adult, a white male, and then there's a little white girl in the bathroom washing her hands, looking over, and he's looking at her and she's looking at him. And then on the other side is Joe Biden with a picture of a women's bathroom sign and all of these statements from Fox News and wherever else about what Joe Biden wants as far as bathrooms in the United States. And I'm just laughing. I'm laughing, y'all, because this is the most ridiculous thing. And it always comes around this time. People are putting these statements on mailers and putting them in the mailbox, and you open them up and you're like, what? Why did no one tell me about this? But listen, this is made up. This is imaginary. This is just put out there to get you to vote a certain way. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to believe it, and you're going to vote against the party that you believe is putting grown men in little girl bathrooms. I don't know where the hell they do that at, but it's not in the United States. We have real issues to deal with. I've got some explaining to do. Let's get into it. People, welcome to another episode of Ayana Explains It All, the podcast hosted by the Black Muslim lady lawyer, born and raised in the hood, now living in the suburbs, tending to my garden and my kids. I'm a single mama with a kid in college and one in high school. And let me tell you, it is not easy. My life is very busy, but I still make time to come here to you people to let you be aware of the issues that you are faced with, that you are perhaps not paying attention to because you don't have time or because you don't know how to use Google. Who doesn't by now? But Ayana Explains It All is available on 12 streaming platforms. I'm also available on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel where I post an audio video of my podcast. I'm also on TikTok at Ayana Explains It All Pod, and I am on Instagram. It's Ayana Explains It All, and with an underscore between all of those words. And my name is spelled Ayana. That's one N, please, one N. But you can also email me at ayanaexplainsital@gmail.com. You can like, rate, subscribe, review, do whatever you want. Please help me out with my podcast. Please help me to grow my podcast by sharing your thoughts with me and the public. Share this with family and friends. Let them know that this is a safe space for no one. You're going to learn something, but you might also shake your fist and tell me how much you can't stand me. The other day I got into it, not really got into it, but I did a back and forth with some people on Instagram who were not happy at all about me saying that Flint, Michigan has clean water. Now listen, I'm sorry that upsets you, but it's the truth. And the federal government has guidelines that Flint, Michigan needs to meet as far as lead. And I believe, I can't remember what the other element was, but it has to be below a certain level year after year. And Flint water is passing. They get a passing grade. They've managed to replace all of the water lines in the city, except for there are about 2,000 homes remaining that need their pipes replaced. And part of the problem with that is that they cannot get into the home. Like if the home is unoccupied, so people are finding that the process is slow. Of course, it's going to be slow. They had to replace thousands and thousands of water systems in people's homes. It's not going to go fast, but the water itself is clean. If you don't trust the water, I hate to say this to you, but that's your problem. But I understand why you wouldn't trust the water, because they told you to trust it, and there was lead in it and other bacteria that was giving people Legionnaire's disease. I get it. I completely understand why people would be hesitant in drinking the water. So if you want to continue to boil water, go ahead. What's stopping you? Not me. If you want to continue to drink bottled water, again, go ahead. What's stopping you? Not me. I'm just presenting the facts. I mean, I've read the statistics, and I read the lawsuits, and I saw the maps, and I read news stories and the Wikipedia entries, and I read statements from government officials, and I mean, the outrage worked. It worked. Now it's time for people to move forward. But apparently people don't want to move forward. They still want to harp on, well, Flint, Michigan doesn't have clean water, as their talking point for whatever reason, to prove that racism exists in the United States. We fucking know it does. Okay? But where we see these problems being ameliorated, we need to say that. There are other places that, I mean, are worse than Flint. Right now. Baltimore, for instance. The city of Baltimore. I talked about Baltimore in the episode on America's water crisis. There are other places that need our attention. Jackson, Mississippi. Now, the EPA is exploring suing officials in Jackson, Mississippi, suing the state, actually, for failing to accept federal funds to ameliorate the water problems in Jackson, Mississippi. They said, no, we don't need it. We don't need that money. And what happened? You see what happened. People got brown shit coming out of their faucets. So now the EPA is exploring whether people's civil rights were violated, whether racism contributed to the decision to decline federal funds to clean up the Jackson, Mississippi water system. And I got to tell you, I think maybe they're going to find some. I think they might find some racism. So people, please keep the comments coming. Keep the criticisms coming. I mean, I'm not always right about everything. I know that. But I have facts. I back up all of my arguments and postulations with facts and figures. That's what I say at the end of my podcast, facts and figures. But one person was like, how dare you use this moment to plug your little lame podcast? And I said, oh, I'm sorry. But that's where I presented the information. So I welcome people exploring and criticizing, because how else do we learn and grow? People who think they know everything, they're not going to grow. They're right about everything. I want to continue to learn and grow as I am on earth. I don't ever want to stop learning. But when it's time to move on, it's time to move on. Okay? There are other places in the United States where Black people and Latinos have poor access to clean drinking water that need our attention. Let's throw our attention to them, please. Let's throw our outrage to them. And you know why people don't know that these places exist? Because they're not paying attention. They weren't paying attention to Flint. They weren't paying attention to Jackson, Mississippi. They're not paying attention to Baltimore either. All of these celebrities who get on the radio and on TV, and this was how it started. It was Chance the Rapper had gone on T-Pain's podcast and just, you know how people flippantly do, Flint doesn't have clean water and Jackson doesn't have clean water, and they just sit there and go, ha, 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 so there's racism. And it's like, dude, no, come on. It's bigger than that. You need to acknowledge that and stop using these same old talking points. Do some research. Stop being lazy-brained. Do some actual hardcore research. And the thing is that once you get into researching all of these topics, it's so big. It will overwhelm you. And you might give up. You might say, fuck it, I don't care. It's not my problem anyway. Or you might just go, you know what? We can do this. We can do that. We can tackle all of this shit. We're Americans. We can do anything, right? Well, we will see. So, last episode, I talked about the importance of voting in midterm elections, and I'm glad that people are seeing the light on this. At least people I talk to. If you can get people to go out and vote, get people to go out and vote. I think the last presidential election, I had to talk people into voting in the election. People who had never voted before. And they were well into their 40s and 50s. And so if you can convince someone to go and vote, do it. Yes, people can be talked into voting. People can be talked into not voting. I've seen this too. I've seen this especially from black people convincing other blacks not to vote because neither party does anything for us. These parties do nothing for us. They just take us for granted. Look at them. They take black women for granted. They take black men for granted. They do nothing for us. And to them, I say, shut your dumb ass up, because that is not true. But this is a problem that we have with politicians and politics. People feel disconnected from their politicians. People feel disconnected from the issues. People feel disconnected from all of this. They don't understand how a certain piece of legislation could benefit them. All people know is that if there's no money in their pockets, they're not doing well, and it's somebody's fault and it's not theirs. And unless you're putting money in my pocket, I don't want to hear anything you have to say. Money equals success. Money equals everybody's doing okay, right? No, because where is the money coming from, sir? You want the government to give you money. Where's it going to come from? And for why would they be giving this to you? And we want everyone to have these utopian neighborhoods and have all the clean air and all the clean water and the nicely paved roads and the nicely funded educational systems. And we want all of this to happen. But guess what? Unless you're voting for it, unless you're putting people in place who are going to ensure that these things happen, you're not going to have any of them. America, the United States, is a democracy. It only works because people vote. It only works because people participate in the political process, in the civic process. It only works because we show up to make it work. This isn't communism. This isn't fascism. It's not even socialism. Not even close. If you're not showing up for your country, then your country isn't going to give anything back to you. And that is the truth. So why are you not voting? Black people need to vote, and I'll tell you why. A lot of the legislation that President Biden has pushed through in the last 2 years directly affect black people. The Inflation Reduction Act, guess what? It reduced the price of some prescription drugs for Medicaid recipients, including insulin. It capped the cost of insulin at $35 for people on Medicaid. And there are a lot of black people in this country on Medicaid. A lot of black children, black men and women. And black men and women, the leading cause of death for black men and women is heart disease. But guess what the second leading cause of death is? There are top 5 leading causes of death: heart disease, cancer, diabetes mellitus. A lot of these are insulin-dependent diabetes patients. And you're going to need your insulin. And insulin costs a lot of fucking money. It is expensive. I don't have diabetes, but I have asthma and I have severe allergies and I have hypothyroidism. These medications are not cheap. Not cheap. And because health insurance is tied to employment, if you don't have a job, you don't have health insurance. And maybe you can get on Medicaid. And now, if you're on Medicaid, the cost of insulin is capped at $35. Hooray! Just like when Obamacare made birth control free with a prescription. Free! Hooray! But you know what? The government has never done anything for black people, right? Please stop saying that. The bipartisan infrastructure law created thousands of new jobs. It's going to help fix the water systems in majority black cities, a lot of them. It's going to ensure that these cities also have access to better internet, broadband internet, better roads. I guess black people don't need better roads and bridges, good air, clean air, whatever. Black people don't need any of that, right? How can you look at your neighborhood, look around you, and say that you are not affected by any of the recent legislation that's been passed, at least by the Democratic Party? You can say that you were affected by changes made to reproductive laws done by Republicans. You can certainly say that. I see a lot of you complaining that your women, your girlfriends, your sisters don't have access to abortion when they need one. They don't have access to an abortion when they need one. I see a lot of men saying that they're going to get vasectomies because they don't want to impregnate a woman because they know that that woman may not be able to have an abortion if she wants one. So please tell me, please, I want to hear more about how government, how none of these parties affect black people. How some of them, yeah, they don't help black people. Absolutely not. Taking away a woman's reproductive rights does not help black people at all. So are you in your state, when this comes up for a vote, are you going to go vote to protect a woman's reproductive rights? You know, black women need this too. I don't know what to say about people. It's a lot of ignorance, a lot of low-brained ignorance, a lot of people just angry for. Okay, I get it. You're mad, but what has made you mad? Racism has made you mad. There are black people who don't believe that racism exists, and then here are black people who are mad because of racism. There are a lot of confused and angry people who have no solutions, just a lot of criticisms, a lot of wrong opinions. Yes, your opinion can be wrong. It can be your opinion, but it can also be wrong. There are a lot of people who are misguided, who are angry for no reason. A lot of people standing in their ignorance. You don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. You can be informed. You can make an informed decision. You make an informed decision about what clothes you're going to wear, what vacation you're going to go on, what car you're going to buy. Why not do the same when it comes to voting? And that is why I'm here today. We're going to talk about some issues facing voters in this midterm election, this 2022 midterm election. Last time I talked about the importance of voting in the midterm elections. And because of time, because I talk so much, I didn't get to talk about any of the issues. So I said, I'm going to get on here this week and talk about issues because, and this is what prompted it, those mailers, but also I saw an article that said slavery is on the ballot. And I said, you know what? Yes, I forgot to talk about that. I forgot to talk about how slavery is on the ballot in some states. And the following information is going to come mostly from Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia.org. Guys, please visit Ballotpedia. I'm telling you, if you're confused about what's going on in your state this election cycle or any election cycle, Ballotpedia breaks down everything, word by word, candidate by candidate, issue by issue, judges, prosecutors, the whole shebang. You will find everything you need to know about what's going on in your state and federally. And you will be so informed there will be no excuse for you to go vote ignorant. You will have all of the information that you need, right? So I wanted to talk about some issues, and I'm gonna expand on one issue in particular. There are trending issues on the ballots this midterm election cycle, and that is including abortion, marijuana, voting-related policies, changes to state initiative policies, and amendments on enslavement, servitude, and criminal punishment. Abortion, according to Ballotpedia, abortion has been a topic for statewide ballot measures since the 1970s. And since 2000, there have been just two general election cycles, 2002 and 2016, without abortion-related state ballot measures. In 2022, there will be 6 ballot measures addressing abortion, the most on record for a single year. And before that, the highest was in 1986. So in California, the ballot will feature an amendment to add reproductive freedom, defined to include the right to choose to have an abortion and to choose to refuse contraceptives to the California Constitution. In Michigan, a citizen-initiated measure would provide a state constitutional right to reproductive freedom, defined to include abortion, contraception, and other matters related to pregnancy. In Vermont, voters will decide on a constitutional amendment stating that an individual's right to personal reproductive autonomy is central to the liberty and dignity to determine one's own life course. In Kansas, voters already rejected a ballot measure declaring that there is no state constitutional right to abortion way back on August 2nd. So they already kicked that. Voters in Kentucky will decide on a similar amendment on November 8th. Montanans will vote on a measure to state that infants born alive at any stage of development are legal persons and require medical care to be provided to them. Woo, that is heavy right there. If you're in Montana, that is some heavy shit. That's heavy. As far as marijuana is concerned, now we know marijuana is legal for recreation in some states, and it's also legal for medicinal purposes in other states. Ohio, it's only legal for medicinal purposes. So they're still jamming people up on low-level marijuana offenses for having weed. But it's legal for medicinal purposes. But measures to legalize marijuana for recreational use are on the ballot in 5 states. Heading into November, marijuana is legal in 19 states and the District of Columbia. Of those 19 states, 12 and D.C. had legalized marijuana through the ballot measure process. In 2022, 5 more states will decide on marijuana legalization ballot measures. In the central United States, voters in Arkansas, Missouri, North Dakota, and South Dakota will consider citizen-initiated measures to legalize marijuana. And in Maryland, the state legislature voted to put the issue before voters. So, in those states, you all get to decide whether to decriminalize marijuana or whether to keep it as is. Let me see these states: Arkansas, Missouri, North Dakota, and South Dakota. I think I can figure out where it's going to be legalized and where it isn't. Although these places tend to surprise you. When it comes to marijuana, they tend to surprise you. But I know more conservative leaning states aren't really for the legalization of marijuana. That is why it's been so hard in Ohio to get it legalized, because a lot of Republicans here are just like, fuck it. They want you to have guns, but not weed. They want you to have guns, but not weed. Mainly because, they can't see a path to them making money off of it, which is silly because they absolutely could make money off of it. But, people are still scared about the reefer. They're still calling it reefer and devil's lettuce and shit, but whatever. I'm not a weed smoker. I don't advocate for any kind of substance use, but I can't stop you from doing it. If that's what you want to do, hey, who am I? There but for the grace of God, go I. So I'm going to just keep my mouth closed on that. But also, and this is the one that I wanted to expound on, voters in 5 states, Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, and Vermont, will decide on ballot measures to repeal language from their state constitutions that allows for enslavement or servitude as punishments for crimes, or, in Vermont, for the payment of debts, damages, or fines. In Alabama, the amendment is part of a recompiled state constitution that voters will approve or reject on November 8th. Now, in 2020, voters authorized the legislature to repeal racist language from the Alabama Constitution. I remember that. That was a big deal. And the Committee on the Recompilation of the Constitution considered the servitude language to be racist, as well as having no practical impact on the state's current practices. Prior to 2022, voters approved measures to repeal such language from their constitution in 3 states: Colorado, Nebraska, and Utah. But before I get to that, I wanted to point out what's going on in Ohio. There's a ballot issue, state issue number 2 in Ohio, that seems kind of benign. It's not really a big deal until you read, ding, 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 always got to read, until you read what they want to do and why they want to do it. You always have to know the who, what, when, where, and why of things, because people will try to pull the wool over your eyes, try to get by on the okey doke and the handshake, and don't look at what I'm doing behind my back. So, Ohio issue 2, the citizenship voting requirement amendment. It's on the ballot this voting cycle. A yes vote, okay, listen, a yes vote supports prohibiting local governments from allowing non-citizens or those who lack the qualifications of an elector to vote in local elections. So basically, they don't want non-citizens voting in local elections. A no vote opposes prohibiting local governments from allowing non-citizens or those who lack the qualifications of an elector to vote in local elections. So if you vote no, then you're saying cities can decide this. Local governments can decide whether they want non-citizens voting in local elections. Why does this matter? Well, typically, in local elections, they set their own rules. You know, whatever issues are on the ballot are on the ballot for that city only. In statewide, county, at least where I live, statewide, county, and federal, you cannot vote unless you're a citizen. Can't vote. But a city, a locale, can decide that they want non-citizens to vote, and they'll probably look at the makeup of their city. In Northeast Ohio, there are cities that are primarily Arab and Persian, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Black, and we'll have Black African immigrants. These people can vote. If they're not citizens, if the Palestinians and Arabs and Persians, they're not citizens, they can't vote. They might make up the good portion of the city, 50%, 40%, but unless they're citizens, they can't vote. Now, why is this a problem? Because the Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, Republican, he supports the measure. Why? He says American elections are only for American citizens. And he is outraged that there are cities in Ohio and in other states that have granted non-citizens the right to vote in local elections. He says that it undermines the value of what it means to be American, which I don't understand, because they're not keeping U.S. citizens from voting. They're just allowing non-citizens to vote in cities. They're not allowing them to vote in statewide or in federal elections. They're not allowing people who are convicted of a felony that prevents them from voting to vote. They're just saying, hey, there are a lot of these people in our city, in our neighborhoods, and they are working and paying taxes. They're in civil service. They're police officers. They're firefighters. They're serving in the military. Maybe we should let them vote. Because, you know, it's expensive to become a citizen. It's not free, okay? And it takes a long time. It takes years. So imagine you're here, you're a new immigrant here, and it takes you 10 years maybe from the first visa process to you being able to afford to or finding a way to becoming a citizen. It could take 10 years. It could take 20 years. It could take 30 years. You know, it's not quick for everyone unless you have money. Some people have money and connections and they can slide on through. But for most people, it takes some years. And you're living and you're working and you're paying taxes and you're like, hey, I want to vote. But you can't. So, but Republicans are upset about this because it undermines the American election process. when we allow people who live here and work here and pay taxes here to vote. My goodness. And now we're just talking about city elections. We're talking about specific cities that have said, okay, we're going to let these people vote. That's it. That's all it is. But they're mad. So they want the Ohio Constitution to prevent cities from allowing non citizens to vote. And he thinks that most Ohioans will support the amendment. I got to tell you, dude, a lot of Ohioans don't give a shit. They're actually not going to vote. They're actually not going to understand what this issue is about because I haven't seen anything about it on TV. I read the news online and I haven't seen anything about this. If your city says it's okay for you to vote, this is like the mix up in Florida when people in the state voted overwhelmingly to support convicted felons who had been released, allowing them to have their voting rights restored. And then when DeSantis became governor of Florida, he said, well, they're going to have to pay their fines and fees first, and it won't be allowed for people who were convicted of certain crimes like murder. But people who went to register to vote were given voter registration cards. They were allowed to register to vote. They were allowed to vote. And now in recent weeks, DeSantis has been having courts issue arrest warrants for people who voted who should not have been allowed to vote. Now, again, they should not have been allowed to vote, but they were allowed to vote. It is not their fault that they were allowed to vote. They assumed that their voting rights had been restored, and nothing in their city or state or county told them otherwise. And so they registered to vote, and they voted. But he's having these people arrested and put in jail because they voted when they shouldn't have. So, I mean, under federal law, we know that only United States citizens can vote. But there are people who have had their voting rights taken away for whatever reason, and they've been restored in some cases. But if it is an ambiguity. There's an ambiguity that exists, and the law should be clear. But do I think people should be outright, flat out denied the right to vote? No, I don't think that. I think if you're living in the United States and you're paying taxes and you're working, you should be allowed to vote. Period. There's certain offices you can't hold unless you're a natural born U.S. citizen like president. I get it. But again, there are people who are living where they are taxed and they're not allowed to vote. How is that fair? That's taxation without representation. We fought a whole war because of that. But it just goes back to people not liking, felons. They don't like immigrants. They're anti-immigrant. They're anti-people who have been in prison. They're anti-this, anti-that. There's so much racism and prejudice in these laws. That is a prejudiced law right there. If you're looking for an example, that right there, issue 2, Ohio, prejudice right there. And there's the racism in these state constitutions that people are trying to get rid of, the racist language about involuntary servitude and slavery as punishments for crime. People are trying to right these wrongs. People are trying to correct this. And why is this so important? In some states, prisoners are made to work and they're not paid for it. They're made to work and they're not paid for it. And so people think that if this language is removed, then that will keep states from being able to use prisoners as laborers, and that's not true. Although it would be great if they were paid a decent wage, because they all have fees and fines and court costs and lawsuits pending against them sometimes. And this money that they would make from these jobs would go towards that. But for some reason, people in state governments are against paying prisoners for labor. They say they can't afford it. But they can't afford to not have these people work, because these people are doing jobs that, in prisons at least, no one else wants to do. People who are non-prisoners are not coming into jails to do these jobs. So they're making prisoners do it. And they get free labor. It's incredible. Amendments to remove constitutional language that allows the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishments were certified for the 2022 ballot in 5 states. Tennessee is voting to remove language that allows the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishments and replace it with the statement, slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. In Oregon, Measure 112 would remove slavery as punishment for crime from the Constitution. It would repeal language from the state constitution that allows the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishments and add language that authorizes an Oregon court or a probation or parole agency to order alternatives to incarceration for a convicted individual as part of their sentencing. In Vermont, Proposal 2 would repeal language stating that persons could be held as servants, slaves, or apprentices with the person's consent or for the payment of debts, damages, fines, costs, or the like, and add slavery and indentured servitude in any form are prohibited. In Alabama, the recompiled Constitution ratification question would ratify and update recompiled state constitution that was drafted to, among other changes, remove racist language. The section stating that no form of slavery shall exist in the state, and there shall not be any involuntary servitude otherwise than for punishment of crime, of which the party shall have been duly convicted, was removed. In Louisiana, Amendment 7 would remove involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime from the Constitution. It would remove language in the state constitution that allows involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime. The Constitution would be amended to say slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited. The amendment would add language stating that the section of the Constitution does not apply to otherwise lawful administration of criminal justice. Now, Louisiana is interesting because Louisiana has requirements for the jobs that the prisoners can do. There are some jobs that you have to have a certain record, and you can't have been convicted of a certain crime to do certain jobs, such as clean the Capitol building and the governor's mansion. And they don't get paid. So, these measures are not to say that they can't make prisoners work. They certainly can. This is just removing that racist language of slavery and involuntary servitude. There are people who read that and state the obvious. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution ended slavery in the states, but it reserved indentured servitude and slavery as punishments for a person convicted of a crime. And so that's how these things were allowed to flourish in these states' constitutions. Because the U.S. Constitution didn't outlaw it, they said, hey, if you want to use this as punishment for somebody who's been convicted of a crime, go right ahead. And they were like, oh, yeah, right, great, we'll do that. And so over these many decades, I mean, my gosh, over 100 years, states are working to remove this racist language from their constitutions. And people are finally, my God, finally waking up to the fact that we need prison reform in the United States. Now, when you say prison reform, people automatically go, oh, she wants to let people get out of prison. No, motherfucker. People who are convicted of a crime should go to prison or should be put on probation or they should be put in a diversion program. Whatever a court decides is fair is what they decide. What I'm saying is that there are people being put to work who have no skills in the particular profession that they're being put to work in, because prisons certainly aren't big on training people, if at all. They're not paying them, or they're paying them so low that these people are in some cases making only $450 a year And all of that money is eaten up by court costs, fees, fines, housing, room and board in the prison. I'm saying that they should be paid where they would have some money to be able to, I don't know, if they have kids, send for child support to their kids, buy food and such, sundries at the commissary. I'm not saying so they could stack their cash while they're in prison, but no, they have obligations. They have obligations to their families, they have obligations to their courts, and a lot of time these pennies that they're being paid is not sufficient to help them cover that. And they're in prison, so it's their fault, right? Great. But you got to do something with these people while they are there. You can't just let them languish. And if people are pushed too far, we've seen what happens in prisons when people are pushed too far. They revolt, they riot. We don't want that. You can't just put people in a prison and be like, here, next 30 years, good luck. It'll be chaos. It will be chaotic. So you put them to work. But then you put them to work and then you don't pay them. What do you think is going to happen? People are going to refuse to work. They're going to refuse to work. What are you going to do? I tell you what they do. They use solitary confinement and other measures, extreme measures, to punish people who don't want to work. So these amendments in these states that are being corrected currently allow for re-enslavement. And we know that prison workhouses were commonly used in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and they were full of poor people and black people, men and women. And that's where the term the chain gang came from, right? Because prisoners would be tied together and forced to work on the railroads or forced to work in the fields, or they would have to build things, or they would have to chop things, or do whatever hard labor they were told to do, and they were chained together to do it. However, not paying them in return for their service, I think, is inhumane. It is inhumane. You can be humane to prisoners. You should be humane to prisoners. Why? Because some of these people are going to come out of prison. Some of these people are not in there forever. And if you treat them humanely while they're in prison, when they come out of prison, they will know how to act like a human being, because they will remember being treated with some dignity, even though they may have committed an abhorrent crime. There are people who are in prison for, selling a little bit of marijuana, selling meth. They go in there and they're treated like shit. What do you think's going to happen? They're going to come out and they're just going to go right back to the same activity they were doing that got them arrested before. It's not that people don't learn, it's that drug addicts are treated like drug addicts. Murderers are treated like murderers. Arsonists are treated like arsonists. People aren't treated like they're humans. They're treated like the crime they are convicted of. They have their dignity stripped of them. They're denied their freedom, rightfully so. But they also have their dignity completely stripped from them. And you can't do that and then put them back out into the world. They're going to fail. You have to give them something. You have to give them some tools to succeed in the outside world once they're released from prison. But that's just my opinion. What does it hurt you to give them, meals and light, like from light bulbs, like electricity? What does it hurt you to give them air conditioning or fans or clean clothes? It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt you at all. Treat people with dignity. As far as jobs in prisons goes, as far as jobs are concerned in prisons, like federal prisons, for instance, the U.S. contracts prisoners to make office products for government offices, chairs, calendars, desks, etc. There are some prisons that use prisoners to train service dogs for veterans. I remember there was a story posted, and a man in prison was talking, and he had his dog with them, and people were like, "Oh, they have dogs in prison?" And I was like, yeah, they have dogs in prison. They have companion pets that they train for disabled people, especially veterans. They use prisoners to train service dogs. And one of the most famous examples of prison work that I remember um, that people were very surprised about is Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper, who's still alive, by the way, a notable serial murderer, a notable serial murderer, narrated books on tape for the visually impaired until just a few years ago when he became unable to speak because of illness. So, yeah, there are prisoners who are doing things that you have no idea, and you go and you order something from a company and you think it's a customer service person in a call center, and it'll be someone who is in a prison. They're order fillers, they are customer service agents. Prisons contract, I mean, because some prisons are privately held, and this is what they do. They sell people into labor, forced labor. I mean, yeah, slavery, indentured servitude. You got to work off your fines and fees this way. We're not going to pay you. Some states do pay prisoners, but it's so little that it's not even remarkable. There's no way that they could ever pay back what they owe to the state. There's no way that they could ever pay back enough to support any minor children that they have back home. It's ridiculous. I mentioned Louisiana a bit ago, but there was a notable story out of Louisiana in 2017 that showed prisoners being used to make repairs and tidy up the Louisiana Capitol building and governor's mansion. And many people were outraged, but some were resolved to the thought that who cares? If you don't go to prison, you won't have these problems. And you may think that it's perfectly fine to use prisoners in this manner and without pay. But as I said before, if these people aren't treated humanely while they're in prison, when they come out, they're not going to know how to act like humans. So if you're looking for an incentive, if you need a reason, it's because eventually some of these people are going to be on the outside again. And all they're going to remember is how they were stripped of their dignity, how they were treated like slaves, how they were treated like servants, how they were abused. Yes, abuse in prisons, in U.S. prisons, is still a huge issue. So imagine you go to prison for whatever reason, you're made to work, you're not getting paid, but on top of that, you're being abused. You're being abused by other prisoners, you're being abused by law enforcement, and nothing is being done about it. The UN Human Rights Council and Human Rights Watch have studied abuse in U.S. prisons, and it is so high, it's ridiculous. And the United States has the most prisoners in the world. The United States of America houses the most people in the prison population in the world. It's incredible. And these people are being abused. They're being mistreated. Their cases are being mishandled. They're being forced to work. And again, you might think this is fine because don't do the crime, you won't have to do the time. But again, I appeal to your decency, perhaps. What happens when these people who are doing the time get fed up and try to take back the power that they've lost? Or when they get out on the outside, they start acting as if they have no idea who they are or what they are or what they should be doing. They don't know how to conduct themselves on the outside once they get out of prison because they've spent 10, 15 years being treated like animals. It's not that they go, oh, I'll never take my freedom for granted again. Some of them are so broken, they're so broken down, they don't even know where to begin. They don't even know where to begin to put their life back together. They don't even know where to start. They don't have any resources. They may not have any family. And so, yeah, some of them end up going right back to what they were doing that put them in prison before they got out. According to an article published by The Guardian using research from conducted by the ACLU, this was published in June 2022. It says that more than 80% of incarcerated laborers do general prison maintenance, including cleaning, cooking, repair work, laundry, and other essential services. For paid non-industry jobs, workers make an average of 13 cents to 52 cents an hour. 7 states, including Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas, pay nothing for the vast majority of prison work. ACL researchers say that their findings raise concerns about the systemic exploitation of prisoners who are compelled to work sometimes difficult and dangerous jobs without basic labor protections and little to no remuneration, without little to no training while making close to nothing. Most incarcerated workers are tasked with general prison maintenance that is crucial to keep the facilities running, according to the ACLU researchers. State governments and the prison system are extracting tremendous value from captive and exploited workforce, all while claiming they can't afford to pay them a livable wage. And so we're squabbling about whether to keep or take out language that is racist concerning prisoners. And they're saying, hey, there's also this other problem. It's bigger than just saying they're slaves and indentured servants. Even if you take out that language, does that mean you're going to start paying them? Because that's the issue. The issue is that they're being exploited and they're not being paid. But of course, the exploitation is allowed because it's in the U.S. Constitution. It's allowed. And the state constitutions allow it. Courts allow it. They say it's okay. It's not cruel and unusual punishment. Forcing people to work on top of their sentence is apparently not cruel and unusual punishment. And as the article says, the United States has a long and problematic history of using incarcerated workers as a source of cheap labor and to subsidize the cost of our bloated prison system. It is long past the time for prison reform in this country. And sure, removing this racist language from state constitutions it's a big deal. But it doesn't get to the heart of the problem. The root of the problem is that prisoners are seen as an exploitative labor class. Like immigrants are seen as an exploitative labor class. But it's okay that we do it because they're here. They might not be here with papers, but it's okay. That's why they came here. This is what they're here for. And prisoners, well, they're our captives. If they hadn't done what they did, then they wouldn't be here. But now that they're here, we might as well use them, right? So the talking point that slavery is on the ballot is eye-catching. But it is true, but it's not the entire story. It's not even the whole story. The whole story is that we need prison reform. And prison reform starts with examining how we are using prisoners while they are behind bars. Are they being trained for the jobs that they're doing? Are they being paid reasonably for the jobs that they are doing? Do they know how to do the jobs that they are doing? Are they safe? Are they safe doing these jobs? You know, they'll put you to work and don't give a fuck if they, are meeting the OSHA requirements or whatever the hell. They don't care. You're a prisoner. You don't deserve anything. Everything you get from here on out is earned. You don't deserve to be safe. You don't deserve to be healthy. You don't deserve to have clean air, clean water, clean beds, clean cells. You don't deserve it. You're a dog. You're an animal. You're nothing. Okay, but here's your parole after 10 years. Go out there and make something of yourself. Are you fucking kidding me? Really? Gee whiz. Ugh. So if passed, the proposals, these amendments, would wholly abolish slavery in those states, but they would not automatically change protocols on prison labor or inmate pay. Experts say that while not all states have constitutions that explicitly permit slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishments, only 3 have passed similar legislation to remove the exception. Colorado was the first to do so in 2018, followed by Nebraska and Utah 2 years later. Experts say that these bills, in spirit, open a conversation about greater issues with the U.S. prison system, which has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world and disproportionately imprisons black people. Look at that. Something that would help black people. I didn't think we did that here. Guess I was wrong. But prisoners who refuse to work are also often punished, experts say, sometimes with solitary confinement or the erasure of sentence reductions for good behavior. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed a case broadly about prison officials' immunity from liability, in which an Alabama inmate was chained to a hitching post in a standing position for 7 hours under the sun. The post was used as a punishment for those who refused to work as part of a chain gang, and the Supreme Court determined that it qualified as unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual punishment. In 2016, forced labor and poor wages ultimately led to the largest prison strike in U.S. history, with an estimated 24,000 inmates refusing to work in at least 12 states. See, I told you. They get fucking tired. They're not just going to sit around and accept being treated like crap. And there are a lot of inmates finding phones and their way to social media, and they're letting people know that this is how they're being treated, that they're being abused, and that they're being treated poorly, and the conditions are poor, and they're not being paid, and they're being made to work, and they have no idea what they're doing or why they're doing it, and they're not being paid. It's abominable. It's a problem. You have the largest prison population in the world, and these millions of people are being treated unfairly. For the most part. So not only does slavery need to be on the ballot, but prison reform needs to be on the ballot. Prison reform needs to be at the forefront. We have a large prison population, and we are not handling it very well. We're selling these prisons into privatization, and we're not keeping check on what these private corporations are doing with the prisoners. But it doesn't matter, because states are exploiting the labor too. Corporations are making money off of prisoners. States are making money off of prisoners. Prisoners are not making money. And I'm not saying that they should. But they have needs. Needs that sometimes only money can fulfill. Believe it or not. So when you go to vote this November, if you haven't already voted, keep in mind what you're voting for, who you're voting for. I can't tell you who or what to vote for, but I can tell you that just because you hold certain values, it doesn't mean that your values belong in the homes and the lives of other people. Do what is best for everyone, not just what is best for you based on how you grew up, or the church that you go to, or the person that you're married to, or what's going on in your household, or whatever you believe in, whatever religious text that you use. I'm Muslim. Islamic values are my values. They are not the values of non-Muslims. I'm not going to put my values on you. This is for me. If they were for you, you would also be Muslim. So I'm not going to put my stuff on you. I'm going to do what's best for everyone, what's going to propel this country into the future. Like I said before, there's a certain party that's not concerned with the purpose, but the power. They only want power. And they will use God and race and religion and whatever other tool they can use to hook that power. They will use whatever scare tactics in mailers and tell you all kinds of wicked tales, things that aren't true to get you to vote for them. And you have to be discerning. You have to be smart. You can't be ignorant. You cannot shut down. You cannot be silent. You cannot be inactive. You have to be active in this. You have to take charge of your democracy, our democracy. And this has been Ayana Explains It All, brought to you by facts, figures, and enlightenment. Take care.